The cassava was apparently ready, for he drained the water from the pot. He took the lid off the pot so as to let the food cool and returned to the grinding stone. I walked toward the shower, which had large stones and rocks where we put the hot water bucket to wash ourselves. I looked around for an edible roten, just hoping, knowing well that there was very little chance that I would find a headless large rat. If there had been one, I was sure that Fokujo would have beaten me to the punch. Occasionally, we children found headless rats near the grinding stone. Esevi and I were well fed in such opportune times. We would gut the rat and season it with salt, black pepper, and ground chili peppers. Then we would roast it on the open fire. We usually ate it with cassava or yams. Boy, was it good. I turned to leave. Fokujo was already eating. He offered me some, extending his plates. I stared at him, half fascinated and half disgusted. I remained absolutely silent for a moment, then walked away to find something fun to do. One of the few entertainments that our village Kusuntu offered was the lagoon. Esevi, my younger cousin Koku, and I often went to swim there. The lagoon on this Saturday afternoon was filled with the village children. I was on top of the big oversized rock, which was elevated above the water. We used to jump into the water from this rock. Presently, I was on top of the rocks when I saw several adults approaching us. Some of them went to the lower level of the lagoon where I was and asked us to leave. The others walked to the larger section to secure the perimeters. All the children obeyed, and they thought the place was safe from intruders. They had guards stationed at the entrances, but had neglected the area behind the bamboo trees. It was there that I was hiding, waiting to see why they had kicked us out of the place. It was not yet 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was waning. They were talking gingerly now. I walked closer to the bamboos. A smile etched on my face. I held the bamboos. I was about to see the whole thing from its inception to its end. The adults walked into the water, the shallow part. One of the men placed himself in the center of the water. The water digested a good 60% of his body. The group positioned itself in somewhat of a circular structure. The only woman among them was directly in front of me. I could see her back. The group chanted words, repeating certain expressions over and over. I watched and listened acutely, understanding most of the words, but some escaping me. The tall guy closer to the elevated rock was in charge. He was calling something, talking to an invisible being. I do not recall his exact words, but it was clear what he was asking for. A couple of them lathered African-style sponges with soap until they were foamy. Then they began to give the guy in the center a bath. They washed and rinsed him. Then came the request from the tall man. Marry him. I tried to understand what this man was asking, and above all, whom was he asking the man in the center to marry? A few seconds after I posed this question, my answer literally appeared. A woman rose from the depths of the water with a huge, long tail of a fish. My mouth dropped and would remain ajar for a long while. I tightened my hold on the bamboos. My eyes widened. I blinked. The woman who just rose from the water had arms and a face like that of a human being. She was smiling and grabbing onto the man who was supposed to marry her. The mermaid pulled the guy toward the bottom of the water. The others fought against this. Water splashed every which way. The mermaid fought harder. Her excitement was palpable. She had accepted their request for the marriage and wanted to take her husband down underneath the waters. The others, I supposed, did not want the guy to drown. Well, at least that was what I thought. Perhaps the mermaid had a solution to this. After all, she existed. Then my logical mind kicked in. Is there life underneath the waters? My mind was filled with questions. This was the first and the last time I would ever see a mermaid. The group managed to prevent the mermaid from taking their companion with her. She disappeared underneath the water. The group talked among itself. It was clear to me that it was time to go. I had to get out of there before they saw me. Thus, I rushed out of there as fast as I could. Years later, because of my formal educational training, I would rationalize this incident as scientifically impossible until 2009, when the invisible became visible and I would completely accept it as real. But for now, I would tuck this memory away to be understood later. I returned home. My grandfather asked me to kill a chicken to be cooked for dinner. Yeah, I heard myself say inside my head. It was my first time. That meant that he thought I was old enough to do an adult task. He handed me the flapping chicken and I seized it by both of its wings, and he left. Not only did he give me the job, he also trusted me enough not to supervise or bear over me. I was only a few feet away from the relatively small detached brick house, which was located near the principal door of the main entrance to the house. Inside this shed-like house was Togbui Zikbui, which literally means grandfather in Ewe. I heard adults describe it as a chair, representing the spirit of the Ipao Ipu family. My grandfather prayed in front of the door once in a while. The prayer was always more or less the same. Grandparents, great-great-grandfathers, and ancestors, Ipu, protect the family, your family. I averted my eyes from Togbui Zikbui and returned my attention to the chicken that I had just killed. I cleaned up the blood on the ground. My grandmother put it in a pot and poured boiling water onto it. This allowed the feathers to soften for the plucking. I removed the feathers, then I cut the chicken into pieces. Not even the feet, the entrails, or the intestines would be wasted. I recall very well the intestines being quite good in fufu soup. For the life of me, I cannot recall what we ate that evening. I do not remember if it was fufu or akple. I cannot be sure, but I definitely know that the chicken I had killed was part of the delicious meal. I recall my stomach being particularly stuffed that evening. The next living creature's life I would take was a snake. One weekend, I went to my elementary school to kill time. I walked around the school. I was presently under several huge mango trees. I looked up at the mangoes. Should I throw a rock or a stick up? No, I was not really hungry. I walked to the classroom buildings where the upper grades were located. I looked up, pondering whether or not to climb. I was on the ground level, the soil. From where I was standing, one had to climb up using the cement stairs, which was a meter or so above. Well, maybe I should go home. I heard chalk striking a blackboard. Someone must be studying on the weekend. I was on the verge of turning around to go home when a snake appeared out of nowhere. I did not budge. The cobra was a mere yard or so away from me. We were face to face. It started hissing, staring at me intently. I pondered the little creature. My soul was calm inside my body. The snake must have sensed this, or perhaps not. I stood there waiting for it to make a move. The guy studying must have heard the hissing noise, for he came out. He was above us on top of the stairs. I looked up at him. I did not know him. He stood there at the elevated position looking down at the cobra and I, waiting to see what I was going to do. I picked up a stick on the ground. The cobra elevated its head and body, curving its head. It was tall, very tall, hissing. It seemed taller than me now. It was a formidable sight to experience. My countenance remained the same, cool, poised to battle. I advanced toward the creature. I struck it without fear, strike after strike. Its body receded. Finally, it lied on the ground, still, motionless. It was lifeless now, dead. Here, I heard from above. You are very brave, he said, throwing a penny at me. I picked it up, not uttering a word. I walked toward the cobra, observed it. Not long ago, it was so full of animation. What animated its body? I asked myself silently. Even back then, I was curious about the nature of existence. I wondered if the cobra would still exist in some shape or form. What just happened? It's dead. It was going to attack me. I turned and walked away with calm. At that time, I did not feel any remorse. But in hindsight, I know that the snake did not have to die. I could have simply walked away once I knew it was ready to attack me. Contrary to the older boy's declaration, I was not brave. I stopped the cobra's earthly experience prematurely and unnecessarily. Why did you challenge me with your hissing? You must have known that there was no way I would have backed down, wherever your soul is now. I apologize for what I did to you 20 years ago, though it was not entirely my fault. Yes, it was. I could have simply walked away, but I did not. It is only now that I feel the sorrow for having ended your life before its natural end. I'm sorry. May the powers of the universe hear me. May you hear me now. I am truly sorry. Not long after ending the cobra's life, my curiosity to explore the unseen world would cause me physical pain. I was home with Akpene, Esevi, and others whose name I do not recall. My cousin Akpene had suggested that we explore the forbidden shed-like little house. She wanted to go inside. I do not remember where she found the key. She must have taken it from my grandfather's room. I hesitated going in because I did not want to be caught. They were already inside. I followed along. They stopped where the light met the darkness. I looked around, waiting to see something mysterious. Maybe I was going to see spirits or ghosts. I went farther inside the room. I was alone now. My fellow crime mates were far away. My curiosity propelled my feet forward. Still, I did not see anything. I turned to the right. There was a very small chair. This was the Togbui Zikbui. It was just a little wooden chair that one could grab with one hand. There were not any spirits. I did not feel or see any such thing. I was calm, unafraid. I could no longer hear my fellow crime mates' voices, but could hear their feet scuffling away from the room. I began walking toward the door without haste. "They're coming!" someone shouted out. By the time I reached the door, my 7-foot-tall, slender grandfather was there to seize me. As he grabbed me, I saw my cousin Kujo running after the rest of the children. He did not catch any of them. They all ran out of the house. Togbui pulled me toward the kitchen as he and Kujo discussed how to punish me. Kujo went into the kitchen and came back with small hot red chili peppers. They peppered my eyes. I screamed and tried to fight them off with my hands and arms, but it was too late. I could not see. Every time I tried opening my eyes, they stung so strongly that the pain was intolerable. Despite this, every once in a while, I had to open them to guide me to water. Eventually, I succeeded, but the water was of very little use. Hours passed, but I still did not feel any better. It would not be until the next morning when I would be able to see. I didn't think the punishment was just. I was particularly unhappy with Fokujo, who seemed to have enjoyed administering the punishment. That was fine, for his day to experience physical pain would soon come. And so it was during the early evening when I exited the kitchen to the right, where Kujo's room was. Reader, please do not ask me what possessed me to go hang out with him. All I can say is that children sometimes forget and forgive bad things done to them rather quickly. I heard a discussion between my grandmother and my younger aunt's husband about some stolen food, sardines. The husband was insisting that it was Fokujo who had stolen the food. He didn't do it, my grandmother protested vehemently. Refusing to believe my grandmother, he walked into Kujo's room. He stared at Kujo with a look of anger for 2 or 3 seconds and then took off his shoes and let one of them descend upon Kujo's face, slapping him so hard that one would have thought that he were merely an object of no value. When the guy was tired of striking him with his shoe, he put it down and slapped his face with his hand so hard that I literally uttered, "Oh," meekly. The husband stopped for a brief second. Cujo uttered no cries, no sound. He received the hits with no emotions. Blood dripped from his face. I had never seen a human being receive such brutal, crude, physical strikes upon his body and not utter a single wail. "Where is it?" the husband demanded. "I don't know," Cujo responded the first few times. Then, after that, he was silent. It would soon be obvious that Cujo was lying. The guy was now apparently tired. He searched the room and found the sardines very close to where he was beating him. I was completely speechless. I could not stand looking at the cuts and blood on Cujo's face, so I exited the room. The husband was so brutal that I would never dare go near him again as long as I was in that household. I mean, he savagely beat Cujo so intensely that I was beginning to doubt if he had any compassion left in him. It is true that Cujo was a strange soul. A few years after I went to America, I learned that he had returned to Quinlan, his native town, where my grandmother was also from. I was told that he became crazy and died soon after. Besides my brother, Koku, and my Ram friend, I also spent a lot of time with my aunt's husband's oldest daughter from his first marriage. She was always teaching SAV and I life lessons. If I recalled correctly, she was 2 or 3 years older than us. SAV and I spent a lot of time with her. On one particular weekend, I recalled her life being in danger. We were passing through Sokboyo's farm. We had to in order to get to the other side. This was the route we usually took. We were merely a few yards away from traversing to the other side when we saw Sokboyo. He had a machete in his hand. I was concerned because the village people considered him crazy. I looked at his face. His eyes looked full of desire, envy, and steadiness. He stood there with wondrous, anticipatory eyes. He threw his arms around my cousin, squeezing tightly. She made a disagreeable moaning noise. He kept going. She insisted that he stop, citing her father's name. It was completely clear to me that he was going to kill her without really meaning it. The desire in him was immense and intense. He hugged her so tightly as if he were never going to let go. She told him that her father was on the way. He stopped. Saying her father's name had worked. We passed him and were gone. When we were far away and could no longer see him, she talked to me about her father. Apparently, he was the only person in the village of whom Sokboyo was afraid. He had beaten him fairly well at one point. He was about average height, about 5'7" or 8 inches tall. Not long after the Sokboyo incident, a few of the children in the neighborhood informed me that something strange was happening at my aunt's house. I immediately rushed to go see the spectacle. Upon arriving, I had to fight a crowd of people to see the real action. In front of the bedroom door was my aunt's husband palpitating on a wooden chair. He was shivering uncontrollably. Neighbors from different parts of the village had gathered around to see what was transpiring. My cousin friend, his oldest daughter, was there. Even Amano was there. I looked at him pitifully. His feet were in the gray silver bucket in the hot water. My aunt went to the kitchen, which was to the left of the bedroom. She returned with more hot water and a washcloth. She changed the water and soothed his face with the washcloth. Nevertheless, he shivered in agony. It looked as if his whole body was going to give in at any second. My aunt applied the towel to his forehead. This seemed to go on for an eternity. I honestly thought that he was going to die. Several thoughts went through my mind. First, I thought that perhaps he had a real physical sickness. Then I considered black magic. That was what a lot of people were saying in town, that he was involved in it. A couple of people went up to where he was and started praying for him in Ave. Mawu's name, i.e. God, was evoked. It seemed we had been there for eternity. Finally, he was getting better. The shivering had decreased tremendously. Several months passed. My cousin left us forever. I think she went to live with her mother. I have not seen her since then.